Okay, Reid. So it's NAA week here in 2020. Well,
Yep.
maybe not.
It was on my calendar, and now it's moved, like every other major event in multifamily this year, including our own.
Yeah. So we had thought that this would be fun to just, since we've now, I don't think actually we've done any, I guess we've done some travel this year, but we haven't done any events this year because once COVID hit early, I know I was in Minneapolis, I think in February, and then most events start in March. So
Yep.
we haven't actually done any events, which is kind of, in one way, I feel super awesome about it. I feel super recharged and like ready to hit the road.
Yeah.
But in another way, it's like, shoot, it feels like a really weird thing. You know what it feels like to me, actually? You remember the first year? Well, of course you do. The first year we started the company, we had like zero travel budget. I know you had grand plans like, oh, you and Nicole are so mobile. You can road trip around the U.S.
See you guys later. Come back to me in 6 months with some business.
Yeah. And of course we didn't end up road tripping anywhere. But my point here is like, it reminds me of that, where it's like events in this space, even though like they can be exhausting, they're a good way to almost mark like the march of time in a way. Like this weekend I got alerts, like we were in San Diego for NAA 2 years ago. When Nicole, we didn't even have a booth, and Nicole and I just bandited, meaning bandit is a running race term when you sneak into a race.
Stole some drink coupons and said you'd hand them out at this location.
Exactly. We just snuck in and we're like, cool, and walking around and pretending, like hiding, like wearing hoodies in San Diego. Like, oh yeah, you can't see my badge because it's covered by the hoodie.
Right.
And just met people. And now obviously it's like NA is becoming like a big staple of ours, or we thought it would be because we went last year as a sponsor. We were going to go this year. So that march of time is what I'm saying is like now feels interrupted, and now it feels like I'm in the freaking Twilight Zone.
Yeah, totally. Bermuda Triangle of multifamily.
Yeah. So we thought just to sort of, I guess, honor this week is that we would be doing a quick, like a couple podcasts around, in lieu of NAA. And so this one we wanted to hit, I almost sound like I'm doing the intro right now, but we just thought we would talk about what we're missing from events this year, and what we look forward to when they start back up again.
Yeah, and probably topics that we would have expected to hear about, which right now, as you and I were just saying offline, but is more important than ever. And that's the unfortunate thing for sure about, what's taking place with all these events being moved or canceled. There's a lot of questions swirling around that frankly were there before, COVID. But now you layer that on top of Black Lives Matter and, the movement that's happening across the country, and the economic crisis, and you got all sorts of really, really important topics that I think people, want to network, want to talk about, want to hear thought leadership on. So it is unfortunate, is the only word that you can really say, that, we're not going to be able to get at those events this year. But the good news is, and, we're going to have Dennis on from Joshua Tree Conference, Did I get that right? Yeah. In just a couple of days, but that several of them are finding ways, obviously virtually, to try and still offer up those forums and, some panels and things like that. Certainly it's webinar Geddon. I like to tack on the Geddon, and we're contributing a little bit to that, but there's no lack of content out there. It's just not the same as obviously being there in person.
Well, where do you want to start? You want to start with what, the sessions we're missing out on, or like how this is impacting, I don't know, the mind meld of apartments, or what?
Yeah, well, sessions works for me. I mean, I guess I don't have it at least committed to memory if we even saw it, but like what AIM had been planning versus, some of the sessions in AA, there's just so much at AA. So it's a lot to get at, but, things that people were looking forward to or were expecting, and, so much over the last few years has been focused on data and technology, rightfully so, as well as, artificial intelligence, which obviously falls under the umbrella of technology. But I think that, the use case of those is what we might have heard some different angles or slants on this year based on, how things are evolving with multifamily.
Yeah, it's funny because that's exactly what I wrote down in my 45 seconds of pre-notes. I said how many sessions would be about big data and AI.
Yep.
Which I know we had one of our interns go back through prior history to see how that's changed over time, if you remember.
Yeah, that was part of and you'll be glad to know this update. The viral video's back on.
Oh, yeah.
Cameron is ready to do it.
Oh, she's going to do it for
She's
us.
fired up, yeah. Yeah. And it'll stay on the original budget too, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, is that like an end of year, mid-year?
No, she thinks end of the summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know.
That was one of the fun facts, all I'm saying is in case,
yeah.
Nobody would have gotten that if we don't tell them.
No, but Reid for years has said this thing, like, we're going to make a viral video. And first of all, he gets mocked by all the new folks that say you can't just make something viral, Reid, because you call it viral.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I think I was one of those people saying that. So there's just an easy way to say this video has the
name of the
intent.
project.
The intent. Yeah, that's right. It is the project name.
Well, anyways, it's a video of fun facts that we spent, I don't know, dozens of hours pulling together facts.
More hours than we'd like to admit.
Yeah. Well, anyways, so one of the fun facts was like over the last 3 or 4 years, big data and AI, as everyone can imagine, eats up a big portion of all of the speaking engagements at NAA. And I was wondering if it finally played its course. Mm-hmm. But I started to go through the different NAA sessions this year, and then the other events that got canceled, like MTech and AIM. And certainly it's funny. In some ways, it felt like more of the same. It was like, oh, is this last year's schedule? Oh, no, this is this year's schedule. Meaning how much not a lot changes from year to year in the mass that is apartments. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was starting to get FOMO on some of the sessions. Mm-hmm. Like as it was talking about, you mentioned Black Lives Matter and fair housing. Mm-hmm. And it's like only last year did I feel like fair housing, at least in my mind, started to really come forward from like we're going to have a session dedicated to fair housing and how it impacts things.
Amazing what a few lawsuits will do to spur some content.
Right.
I mean, because, until somebody gets sued, it's like the expression, nothing happens until something gets sold. But, certainly, a lot of people's interests were piqued after the HUD complaint on Facebook and then the subsequent lawsuits that we've seen in the industry. So that was definitely one that, we were both interested in and really want to be thought leaders. So lots of gray area here. Maybe that's a decent jumping off point, and not to pontificate, I guess, or just go off on a rant on fair housing. But any other thoughts, like now that you've done, because you've been leaning in pretty good over the last few weeks as far as research, any questions that you would be raising your hand if you were, in an audience, like watching a panel right now, people talk about this?
About fair housing, or
like what are some of the things you would pose if you had some folks up there, either from HUD or folks in multifamily? I mean, we know what was the law firm, Holland Knights,
Holland Knight,
Holland Knight. Yeah. So I feel like she did a nice job. That was at OpTech last year of fielding most questions, but there was a lot. I also thought she kind of talked around, and so. We approached her afterwards and had some questions, but I just didn't know if NAA had, a panel or a session devoted to this. Do you feel like you have another 2 or 3 questions now that you'd be really eager to get at?
Well, always, but also I would be asking them afterwards and not tearing. Don't want to scare people away. But I think what we were getting at in that OpTech session, I don't feel like it's been any more clear since we had that conversation with them and the other attorneys we've engaged with since, but is just I want need personally a decision tree on the gray area as you talk about, because it's like every question we asked, that organization or any of the other attorneys that are even ones that have been in HUD for a long time, it's like, well, what do you think about with bus stop ads? Like, I don't put them on every street in a 10-mile radius. How come am I expected to do that for digital marketing? And they're like, well, it depends on what your risk level is. And I just need a decision tree to help tell me, well, what the hell is my risk level? And look, we almost as much as anybody can understand, you can get sued for anything regardless of cause. So then I just want to know, well, what do I need to do to just give myself, I guess, a fighting chance? Because I need, if I'm an owner or operator, I need to make business sense. I need to advertise, but I can't afford to send a direct mailer to everybody's home in Denver. Right? So what is almost expected to be appropriate? And then getting more into the Black Lives Matter conversation is, what can we do to not just follow the law? And I guess this maybe that session wouldn't be appropriate, but this may be in a session of like advanced marketers, but not just to follow the law, but what unintended consequences are we having by the way that we advertise today and how it's impacting these other populations? And I know we got into this with Benson about disparate impact.
That's where I was going to go. Yep.
But the problem with disparate impact, at least as I've seen it, is everyone uses it as like leprechauns have come in. They've infiltrated our campaigns, and it's like, and we don't know what the mischievous leprechaun did. It's like, cool. What can we do to determine that the leprechaun caused a negative outcome or not? Because the way it's thrown around now is like maybe negative stuff that happens, and it's like, yeah, and how do I make it so that I'm not accidentally impacting these other populations, but still make a good business decision by running this kind of advertising? And I guess like just tying that all to the whole movement that's happening today.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's anything anybody can do, especially in this digital era, to completely eradicate. It's almost, I hate making the comparison, but I will, to COVID. You're looking for a vaccine almost for disparate impact. And, to me, the best thing you can do is try and mitigate that risk or that potential up front. And that's as far as you can take it, but you can't actually eliminate, any possibility of disparate impact. And I said that, and I know she's okay because she's already listened to the podcast and has caught her name on it before, but just, I think it was last week, talking to Melissa Robbins from Graystar, and they're looking at some recruitment campaigns right now for some job fairs here in the mountain region. And she brought it up, and it wasn't the first time we talked about it. And she just said, is there anything else, like since we last spoke, that you guys are doing to factor for disparate impact? And my answer hasn't changed much, but, I let her know there's regulations, restrictions up front that are already in place, either through the platforms we work with or, well, primarily that. But then there's some self-regulation. But I told her, I said, Melissa, inevitably there's going to be some minorities and majorities. And I don't mean that in a demographic standpoint, but like as far as trends that we see or outcomes. And I think you're, hopefully tracking me, but it's like, when you're running, impressions across the internet, you're going to be able to say, hey, these folks over here got more impressions or these didn't, even though they were driven by, as you often point out, psychographic targeting or, location or other things that are clearly not demographic driven. But those outcomes nonetheless, are there. And so I just don't know what you do about that.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole, forget what the phenomenon is called in like scientific research, but it's the whole deal where it's like, once you measure something, it changes, just by the fact that you're measuring it now. You know what I'm talking about? So basically it's like, if you're trying to,
I like it. I don't,
there's this phenomenon where it's like, if you're observing something, like if a coin flip, you're observing coin flips or whatever, it's like, okay, it's always a 50-50 split. But if you start observing it, even if it doesn't know you're observing it, it changes. It's this weird phenomenon. So now it's not, coin flip isn't 50-50. It's like,
you piqued my interest.
Yeah, 60-40.
There's the Jurassic Park, and I don't know if I don't think that was Murphy's Law, but where he just says, a drop of water, like you think it's going to go the same direction over and over.
Chaos theory.
Was that chaos theory?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
don't question me on Jurassic Park.
I'm usually the movie expert here between the two of us, but sounds like movie. I need to stay away from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, there's this. I'll see if I can find it before we're done. But yeah, it's this. Once you start measuring something, it automatically it changes, even if for no reason. It's kind of like the placebo, non-placebo thing. It can have an impact.
Yeah. Well, we did point this to Joya just on an episode we'll be airing here or already have. Just spotlighting, in that case that we were talking to her about presentations and how they've evolved, kind of on the business acquisition trail, and in particular from a marketer's perspective. And we brought up fair housing in that conversation, just asking, how much of a point of conversation is this right now? And I think she, has probably been certainly on less pitches the last few months than she had, based on what we heard from last year. but she was still saying that it wasn't a super active conversation, that it wasn't something they really bring forward or something that owners are actively like asking about, which really surprised me. I don't think I have that wrong. Wasn't that her answer? That it's not something that, they're actively like saying, hey, here are all the measures we take, as from a marketing standpoint. And I see it, that, and you've agreed, as an opportunity, at least for us as a company, to get out in front of it. So without staying on this for much longer, because I know there's other things we want to bring up, I'm just trying to say, this started with what questions might you ask if you were, in a crowd with a panel up there. So decision tree was one of them. Disparate impact was a second. And then for me, the third is still what I asked Joya. I'd be curious to know from others. Like, is this something that we all should be more proactively talking about, leaning into, or is it, still yet not reached that level, which seems almost absurd based on, the climate of America right now?
Well, to that point, I was going to say, like, I felt like in prior years, like even when we were asking those questions at OpTech last year, I felt like it was almost taboo to start asking these questions.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah,
like Greg was
very
there,
awkward.
and she was there, and we were asking. I could just feel everybody was a little bit prickly with like, oh shoot, we're talking about like advertise. So to me, that reaction automatically tells me if this is an uncomfortable conversation, as now we know, like, well, then that's something we should be talking about.
That's right,
because that means that there is something wrong.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So I feel like that's the biggest miss, at least for me, is like not getting to rub shoulders and make this more of an active conversation with the folks at an event like NAA.
Yeah. All right. Well, this one would be kind of adjacent as far as something else that continues to bubble up. And I do mean it adjacent because it's not exactly fair housing, but it's just the privacy laws and, what was happening or what has happened as far as legislation passed out in California. So, we haven't, I think we had maybe one or two, and of course it was natural for Wendell to be one of them, asking, just to make sure we're covered or that we were clear about, what that law involved and that we were compliant as an agency. But, is that something that you would have been curious to hear more about? Or do you think that's kind of like, I don't want to call it a flash in the pan, but, California being California in a way, and, being a little bit stricter, which isn't, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and that the rest of the country isn't necessarily going to follow suit. That would be my question, I guess, if we were getting into kind of data privacy laws and whether this legislation out of California is going to have a ripple effect across the industry.
Well, I think it would be some conversation because there's obviously a lot of rentals in California, so I think that permeates, and it's not like a lot of the folks that go to NAA, like even if you're a California-based company, then you typically have properties that may be in surrounding states. And so I believe it would be part of the conversation. You just made me think, though. I wonder if this data privacy stuff is going to get as messy as fair housing is. So as we get more and more into fair housing, we realize that every kind of township might have its own legislation on it. Mm-hmm. So I could totally see that happening where it's like the city of Inglewood passes whatever data privacy thing. And it's how the heck are we going to keep track of it unless the U.S. takes a stance? So it's almost like, marijuana wasn't as bad as fair housing is, but it's like with every state you had different laws around marijuana. It's like, how do I keep track? And if you're with marijuana, it was a little bit easier because the little bit we touched that industry before, at least it was like, it's more of a physical thing. So it's like, okay, well, don't ship marijuana across state lines. Totally get it. No problem. Right. But when it comes to like running digital ads or whatever you're marketing and you have so many people relocating to areas, that can get really tricky. So you just maybe wonder if that's going to become a problem. So that now I'm right now thinking like, shoot, the US needs to take more of a stance like the EU. That way it's just like one and done and you don't get these just, because I could imagine it like these patent trolls, basically, where it's like if you have like where people just start suing folks left and right for data things that they can't even prove. They're just like hoping to make some money out of it.
Well, that's what I've been wondering is, and that would be one of my questions in a session like that is what can we expect? Does anybody have a forecast as to like the policing, of these privacy data laws and legislation? Because it does seem like you said anybody could just get a kind of burr up there, and make life miserable, for a lot of people. And so I don't know how they're going to manage that. And that's something I don't want to say that, these lawmakers don't think about, but sometimes you wonder because they come out with these sweeping, like big, changes, and then they don't really speak to like what to expect next other than, hey, you need to follow this. And it's like, okay, well, thanks for the notice. So staying, if we can, just a little bit more on transitioning now, hopping over from, our little lily of, I'm trying to use my, leapfrog.
Lily to lily.
Yeah,
lily
we're going
pad.
from lily to lily in AA potential sessions but is data warehouses. So, I wish that you were sitting next to me in Lurch and you were in something at OpTech, but there was one that you did miss that had the CCPA and then also talked a little bit more about data warehouses. But I'd be curious with all the data and disparate data and, concerns around governance and, fidelity and all these other things. If we're going to see, a Snowflake solution enter the multifamily, and maybe, it's not a new company, but it's just that we're going to see more of our own clients using Snowflake and the like, as far as their own data storage and also being better and more nimble at leveraging their data, for practical insights, but also, getting back to that governance. So what are your thoughts there? Like, we're excited, much bigger vision for us a few years out, and don't think I'm letting a cat out of bag, but, we see opportunity there as far as, more kind of developing data lakes and, providing that service, because it seems like one that's desperately needed. But because of the fragmentation in this industry, I don't think they always can, they're not necessarily seeing that picture really in focus yet.
Well, part of it is we know like the industry is far behind, and the current tech providers do a good job of locking folks out. But it's really interesting because I was just funny enough listening to an interview on my way in with the office today with the founder of RJ Metrics, and RJ Metrics had they were basically a data analytics company. They were trying to basically become like a Tableau thing for different, but they were focused on e-commerce. So if you had an e-commerce store, they would analyze your data. They would append consumer information with the buyer, and then just teach you about like, oh, it's mostly 28-year-olds that are interested in yoga and all this stuff, but then help visualize it. So they were started in 2008, and they originally, then Snowflake didn't exist. AWS was in its infancy. Google Cloud didn't exist. And so they had built all this like homegrown tech where like end to end, like data warehouse, quick real-time analysis, ingestion of data. And what ended up happening was in I think it was like 14 or something, but basically Looker came on. And they came on the scene, and Looker just crushed them. And it was because like they had started and they had been doing it for like 6 or 8 years at that point. They had raised like $24 million, and it was like, but Looker came in like just a couple of years later on top of like Google Cloud and some of these other like and Snowflake like data lakes and services, and it just made it easy. So all of a sudden, like all of this money, the $20 million they put into developing like how can we quickly ingest data or whatever, became obsolete. And so they were like, oh damn, because they were like, they got crushed. And so they were like, shoot, and they had to end up niching down. So they went from like the niche of e-commerce to like the niche of e-commerce where people are not yet big enough to invest in like a Google Cloud or don't have the technical expertise. And so it really like sliced them down to where the market wasn't that big. And they ended up selling to Magento, the e-commerce platform. And you'll get where I'm going with this.
Looker sold to Magento?
No, not Looker.
Sorry.
RJ Metrics.
Sorry.
Yeah, Looker sold to Google for $2.6 billion, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a famous text message from the two founders of RJ when the one saw the article, and they said, like, we effed up. Like, because they just started too soon.
Yep.
They were just slightly ahead of their game. But my point...
Which sounds messed up, right? We started too soon. We were,
right.
It's like usually the first ones in are the ones that get the big, cash out. Not always. I know there's plenty of exceptions.
A lot of times it's the second player that makes it. But it's funny because they ended up selling out that to Magento. Magento didn't want the other end of their solution, which became, and you'll know this, and so will Lurch, but became Stitch. So you know how Lurch has always talked about Stitch? So Stitch was basically like a Zapier for data. So we can connect all these different data sets together quickly. And the whole Stitch ended up selling though. So they sold the first one They were doing like 4 million in revenue, and they sold the first one for like less than 20 or less than 30 million bucks. Stitch in like 18 months, because they were allowed to keep that IP, end up doing like 6 million in revenue, and they sold for 60 million. They sold for like 10x revenue. And the whole reason why is because like, shoot, now the companies are growing, and they all kind of have these legacy systems, these data lakes, but they can't get data into them. There's no efficient way. So Stitch just allowed you to take data kind of like from anything and put it in there. My whole point of this, and now I'm taking up most of the time we have left on this podcast with this. The whole point of this was back to your thing, is like, I wonder, because we've said this for, it feels like years now, but I wonder like who's going to be able to come in and finally disrupt all of these legacy Yardi, RealPage, whoever connections, and is going to do the, to your point, kind of like the Zapier or whatever. And that would just be connecting the systems. But one data, as you're saying, warehouse or lake system where everything can pull into, and now you own it, and now you can take it wherever you want. And it would allow the whatever, your RealPage and your Yardi data to get mixed and matched, and it's fine.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it right there. Digible is changing its roadmap. We are fully now focused on solving this problem. No, I'm kidding. I hope that day does come. I think a lot of people would. But see, it is exciting to think about.
I think the problem with whoever does it will be like, how similar to what we've said, is how do you avoid getting bought before you finish the mission?
Right.
Because what ends up happening is like a strategic buyer will spend way more on you than someone that's just going after the value. The value you create out of this is worth like 3 to 5x. Mm-hmm. But a strategic buyer will pay 10 to 20x. Right. And so I feel like
they see the vision.
The current,
and then it cuts off the
right. It's all about exactly. I'm pointing at Reid like emphatically. It's all about the like how you can lock it down. So I feel like you could spin up a landing page, Reid, underneath Digible moniker saying we built this data lake, and then like get that part of the business can get bought for
here's our price
amount of money without any work done.
Yep, get my pinky out,
Well, I don't know that we have time to cover this subject, but here I do want to talk about this at some point. But additional revenue streams for apartments. So like everyone thinks about how do I maximize the cost per square foot, and there's all of this talk about like the common spaces and whatnot getting used for other things, like, oh, should we rent out the pool to non-residents and stuff? It seems to me that there are opportunities for other additional revenue streams. So we've seen some buildings that have like co-working space, that have I'll say that renting out the common
short-term
spaces.
rentals
and short-term rentals, but like
corporate.
To me, there's like, and we see some of this, but it's like just quickly in the 30 seconds I wrote stuff down. But I was thinking like the moving in of residents and out of residents. It's like I know there's referral programs like use this mover, but it seems like there's much of a larger opportunity there to me. Seems like there's a big opportunity around like, I imagine when I was, and this is, people are going to think this is corny, but when I was going to school, I was always using like the vending machine or buying like an extra notebook or whatever. It's like a convenience store almost. It's like all of these apartment buildings rent out like space for, they hope a Walgreens moves in underneath them, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying become a Walgreens, but it feels like, and maybe that's part of like the, maybe it doesn't work anymore because Postmates and Seamless is around and you can flash order anything, but it seems like there would be something there to me. And then rent payments. So it's been years since you've had to do this, and same for me at this point, but like splitting the payments for your rent by across roommates, or even as I was thinking about it, like I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, but I was thinking like how hard it is to budget. Like if you're making like paycheck to paycheck and you're trying to pay your rent all in one nut, and particularly during these COVID times, and it's like, oh, I got to find $1,000 and I got to do, it's like, if you could only be putting away like, oh, I'm going to put $300 out of this paycheck and $600 out of that paycheck and $100 out of this one. It's like to make these smaller payments to add up to your rent. Mm-hmm. Seems like there's opportunity there because I'm sure you've been in those situations where cash is tight and you're looking at your bank account and you're like, I need to save that for rent, but I really need, I'd rather be in smaller chunks than this like all at once thing.
Right. So where's the revenue come in? Like what's the model on that?
Well, one is,
you're talking about like paycheck deductions for rent. right?
Right. That could be
Like
one
set up
angle.
deductions.
Or there's like, or do you do like with the roommate thing? Is it more of like by roommate per check, and then it's more of you're charging a convenience fee, which gets really annoying to the renter. But maybe it just helps, like depending on your property, like maybe it helps you just recover more rent instead of like right now, a lot of folks are at 99% rent payments. But once shoot, what the hell is it? What's the thing when you lose your job and you get paid?
Unemployment?
Unemployment.
Yeah.
Once unemployment runs out, it's like, now what's it going to be like? So I feel like people could just be scrapping together some. Anyways, maybe it just helps them recover more because you're at 99% now, but maybe in a couple months you'll be at 92% because there's so much unemployment going.
Well, backing up on the idea of like let's say built-in pharmacy or something, I think depending on what, of course, I mean, that's always the classic, right? Depending, but that could be super interesting. What I think you'd go up against, and we've already heard this from some of our clients with the short-term rentals or the stay Alfreds and whatnot, is that the current residents or let's just say the long-term residents can't stand that, and that's what you'd battle.
You mean
like
if you opened your own store,
right?
Yeah.
If you were like, guess what we're going to be doing, and then you had like non-residents coming by, that were like, hey, I just need to pick up some cold medicine or something.
Right.
But I still think it's a really fascinating idea. You mentioned the movers. I think taking that a step further, and you've heard this before, I mentioned it, I think when we were in Minneapolis, talking to, Janet, on that call, but I think there's definitely something there with rebates where it's like, think of all the business that apartments send to their local communities and retailers. And, for all I know is they get like maybe some coupons, but if you were to say, hey, you're a pizza joint down the street, and if all we do, like every time a resident comes in and signs up, or we keep it like up on a board, wherever it is, and it's like, and then we can track that back because we know that resident. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, if they end up spending, $5,000 in the year for you, then we should get 2%. Mm-hmm. And then collectively, if you did that with retailers around your area, you could end up with $100,000 at the end of the year that would make your regional super happy.
That'd be really interesting. Basically like a shared referral program.
Yeah, it's a referral. Yeah, total retail referral program. And I think you just look at it on an annual basis. And, if I'm them, what do you have to lose if you're the pizza joint? Yeah. It's like, that's great. You're going to put us up as a preferred, retailer in the community. Awesome. Mm-hmm. And all it's going to cost us is 2%. That's guaranteed. That's not me putting my money out there and hoping that I get some business out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hate to cut this short, but I got to jump on another call. So this is, I do think we should pick this back up another time, but
I do too. My cliffhanger is APIs. I want to talk about APIs. Okay. and you know why, because we're in freaking API hell right now, sorting through all this. So I would love for that to be a session, at NAA or MTech or whatever, OpTech. Nobody's talking about that. And I think that would be another one that could get a little awkward as far as like, who's open, who's not, why, and do you guys have any clue how much they charge people, which is frankly, I think keeping the industry back. Mm-hmm. So yeah, APIs.
Totally. Well, I hope you guys enjoy our week of, in lieu of NAA content. We got a couple really fun ones coming up. So we have Dennis from, as Reid said, Joshua Tree Conference Group, going to talk about how events are being changed by the current situation. We have one on, we have a webinar update, a COVID webinar data update. And then...
Well, we're hoping to get, our friends from Origin on, but still TBD, right?
Yeah. Well,
as far as owners and investors.
Yep. Looking to have a podcast on owners and investors. So anyways, there's some other good stuff that's coming out in the weeks around this, like a great interview about ad fraud and what you should be aware of when,
Is that's this week with Manny?
Yeah.
That's great. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyways, hope you guys enjoy.